The humid night air clung heavily to the remote outpost of Camp Nam Dong in the central highlands of Vietnam on the early morning of July 6, 1964. 12 members of the United States Army Special Forces Team, a 726, were stationed there alongside South Vietnamese commandos and local fighters. The jungle surrounding the camp was deceptively quiet, masking the movements of a massive enemy force that had been stalking them for days. Inside the perimeter, the tension was palpable as the soldiers sensed something was wrong in the darkness. The thick mist rolled down from the mountains, obscuring the barbed wire fences and the claymore mines that served as their first line of defense against an invisible enemy. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the deafening roar of mortar rounds impacting the center of the camp. The ground shook violently as explosions tore through the barracks and the mess hall, sending debris flying in every direction. Bright flashes of light illuminated the terrified faces of the defenders as they scrambled for their weapons and fighting positions. The attack was precise and overwhelming, designed to create maximum confusion and panic among the inhabitants of the isolated base. Within seconds, the peaceful night had transformed into a chaotic inferno of fire and smoke. The enemy had achieved total surprise, and the first wave of their assault was already breaching the outer wire. Hundreds of Viet Cong soldiers and North Vietnamese Army regulars poured out of the tree line, screaming as they charged toward the crumbling defenses. They threw satchel charges into the trenches and fired automatic weapons indiscriminately at anything that moved. The defenders at Nam Dong found themselves outnumbered and outgunned, facing a coordinated assault from 2 reinforced battalions. The situation was dire as the enemy fighters swarmed over the sandbag walls, engaging the Special Forces soldiers in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The air was filled with the acrid smell of cordite and burning wood. It seemed certain that the camp would be overrun within minutes, leaving no survivors to tell the tale. In the midst of this fiery maelstrom stood Captain Roger Donlon, the commanding officer of the detachment. He moved with purpose through the chaos, rallying his men and directing fire where it was needed most. Despite the overwhelming odds, Donlon refused to yield ground to the advancing enemy forces. He dashed from one position to another, carrying ammunition and dragging wounded soldiers to safety, while enemy bullets kicked up dirt around his feet. His presence provided a critical anchor for the defenders who were on the verge of collapsing under the sheer weight of the assault. Donlon knew that the survival of his team depended entirely on their ability to hold the inner perimeter. The stakes at Nam Dong were incredibly high, not just for the men inside the wire, but for the entire American strategy in Vietnam. This camp was a key element of the Civilian Irregular Defense Group program, designed to stop the infiltration of communist forces from neighboring Laos. If Nam Dong fell, it would signal a major victory for the North and a devastating blow to the morale of the South Vietnamese government. The loss of the camp would also expose the vulnerability of the Special Forces outposts scattered throughout the remote border regions. The United States could not afford such a public and humiliating defeat at this early stage of the conflict. Could a dozen American advisors and a few hundred indigenous allies hold off a force of nearly 1,000 determined attackers? The enemy had planned this operation for months, studying the layout of the camp and identifying its weak points. They brought heavy weapons, including mortars and recoilless rifles, specifically to destroy the bunkers and command post. The defenders were cut off from immediate reinforcement, with the nearest friendly forces miles away through hostile territory. The radio lines were buzzing with frantic calls for air support, but the low cloud cover and darkness made accurate bombing runs nearly impossible. The fate of Camp Nam Dong hung by a thread. Captain Donlon continued his one-man defense of the camp, even after sustaining multiple shrapnel wounds to his stomach and shoulder. He manned a 60mm mortar pit alone after the crew was incapacitated, firing rounds until the weapon was destroyed by a direct hit. Bleeding profusely and exhausted, he refused medical evacuation and continued to crawl between fighting positions to encourage his men. He hurled grenades at the enemy soldiers who had breached the main gate, single-handedly preventing them from overrunning the command center. His actions that night would become the stuff of legend, embodying the motto of the Green Berets, to oppresso liber, or to free the oppressed. As dawn approached, the sound of aircraft engines finally broke through the noise of the battle. A flare ship arrived overhead, dropping illumination rounds that bathed the battlefield in an eerie artificial light. This allowed the defenders to see their targets clearly for the first time in hours. The arrival of air support turned the tide, as fighter bombers began to pound the enemy concentrations outside the wire. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces, realizing they had lost the element of surprise and were now exposed to air power, began to withdraw back into the jungle. The battered defenders of Nam Dong had held the line against impossible odds. The aftermath of the battle revealed the terrible cost of the victory. The camp was a smoking ruin, with bodies scattered across the perimeter and buildings reduced to ash. 7 Americans and dozens of their allies had been killed, and many more were severely wounded. However, they had inflicted massive casualties on the enemy, with over 60 confirmed dead left behind and countless more dragged away. Captain Roger Donlon became the first American soldier in the Vietnam War to receive the Medal of Honor for his conspicuous gallantry. The defense of Nam Dong proved that the Green Berets were a force to be reckoned with. The Green Berets, officially known as the United States Army Special Forces, were a unique breed of soldier created for exactly this kind of asymmetric warfare. President John Fitzgerald Kennedy had championed their expansion in the early 1960s, recognizing the need for a flexible force capable of countering guerrilla insurgencies. Unlike conventional infantry, the Green Berets were trained in languages, culture, and diplomacy, as well as advanced combat tactics. Their primary mission was not just to fight, but to teach others how to fight. They were the tip of the spear in the effort to win hearts and minds in the rural countryside. The cornerstone of the Special Forces strategy in Vietnam was the Civilian Irregular Defense Group program. This initiative involved recruiting and training minority ethnic groups, such as the Montagnards, to defend their own villages against communist intimidation. The Montagnards were tough and independent people who lived in the mountainous Central Highlands and had long been marginalized by the Vietnamese government. The Green Berets lived among them, ate their food, and learned their customs, forging a bond of brotherhood that transcended nationality. This close relationship allowed the Americans to build an effective intelligence network and a loyal fighting force. Life in a remote camp was a constant test of endurance and adaptability for the 12-man Special Forces team. They were often the only American presence for miles, completely isolated from the main supply lines and support structures. They had to be self-sufficient, managing everything from defensive construction to medical care for the local population. The team medic played a crucial role, often treating hundreds of villagers for diseases and injuries, which helped to cement the trust between the soldiers and the community. These medical civic action programs were just as important as the military training they provided. The Green Berets taught the Montagnards how to use modern weapons, set up ambushes, and patrol the dense jungle terrain. They transformed farmers and hunters into disciplined soldiers capable of standing up to the Viet Cong. The training was rigorous, focusing on small unit tactics and marksmanship. The Americans also provided the Indigenous forces with better equipment, including carbines, radios, and uniforms. This empowerment gave the Montagnards a sense of pride and a stake in the war effort. It also denied the enemy free movement through the strategic highlands, disrupting their supply lines and safe havens. However, the relationship between the Green Berets and the South Vietnamese Special Forces was often strained. The South Vietnamese government in Saigon was suspicious of the armed Montagnard groups, fearing they might one day turn against the state. This political tension complicated the mission of the American advisors, who often found themselves mediating disputes between their allies. Despite these challenges, the Green Berets remained fiercely loyal to the indigenous people they fought alongside. They respected the Montagnards for their bravery and their intimate knowledge of the jungle environment. Beyond the defense of static camps, the Green Berets also conducted highly classified reconnaissance missions deep into enemy territory. Units like Project Delta and later the Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group operated in the shadows. These elite teams were tasked with locating the elusive Ho Chi Minh Trail, the vast logistical network used by North Vietnam to funnel troops and supplies into the south. They would insert small patrols by helicopter into the most dangerous areas of Laos and Cambodia, often outnumbered hundreds to one. Their job was to find the enemy, call in airstrikes, and vanish before they could be caught. The dangers faced by these reconnaissance teams were unimaginable. They operated with no identification and carried untraceable weapons, knowing that if they were captured, the government might deny their existence. They moved silently through the jungle, avoiding trails and booby traps, always aware that a single snapped twig could give away their position. The intelligence they gathered was vital for the American bombing campaigns, but the cost was high. Many Green Berets vanished on these missions, listed simply as missing in action, their fate unknown to their families back home. One of the most audacious operations involving the Green Berets was the Sun Tay raid in November 1970. Intelligence reports indicated that dozens of American prisoners of war were being held at a camp just 23 miles from Hanoi. A select group of Special Forces soldiers trained extensively for months on a full-scale replica of the prison compound. The mission, code-named Operation Ivory Coast, required absolute precision and perfect timing. They planned to land helicopters directly inside the prison courtyard, neutralize the guards, and extract the prisoners before the North Vietnamese could react. The raid was executed flawlessly from a tactical perspective. The assault force landed at Sun Tay under the cover of darkness, surprising the defenders and securing the compound within minutes. The Green Berets moved with surgical efficiency, clearing room after room in search of their captive brothers. However, they found the cells empty. The prisoners had been moved to another location just weeks before the raid due to flooding. Despite the intelligence failure, the raid demonstrated the incredible capability and daring of the Special Forces. It also sent a powerful message to the prisoners that their country had not forgotten them. Throughout the war, the Green Berets continued to adapt to the changing nature of the conflict. As the United States began to withdraw its conventional forces in the early 1970s, the role of the advisors became even more critical. They worked tirelessly to prepare the South Vietnamese army to fight on its own, a task that proved increasingly difficult. The political instability in Saigon and the corruption within the military leadership undermined their efforts. Yet the men on the ground remained dedicated to their mission and to the local people they had come to know and respect. The Siege of Khe Sanh in 1968 highlighted the strategic importance of the Special Forces camps. Located near the demilitarized zone, the combat base at Khe Sanh was surrounded by thousands of North Vietnamese troops. While the Marines held the main base, the nearby Special Forces camp at Lang Vây was overrun in a terrifying night attack involving enemy tanks. It was the first time the North Vietnamese army had used armor in the south. The Green Berets at Lang Vây fought desperately, destroying several tanks with shoulder-fired rockets, but were ultimately forced to evacuate. The fall of Lang Vây was a tragic chapter in the history of the Green Berets in Vietnam. Of the 24 Americans at the camp, 10 were killed or missing and 11 were wounded. The survivors managed to escape through the perimeter wire and evade capture in the jungle until they were rescued. The battle demonstrated the evolving capabilities of the North Vietnamese army and the increasing intensity of the conventional war. It also underscored the vulnerability of the isolated border camps in the face of a determined and well-equipped enemy offensive. As the war drew to a close, the Green Berets faced the heartbreaking task of leaving their Montagnard allies behind. The United States government had decided to end its involvement in Vietnam, and there was no plan to evacuate the indigenous fighters who had served so loyally. Many Green Berets felt a deep sense of betrayal, knowing that the Montagnards would face severe retribution from the victorious communist forces. Some advisors tried to secure visas or passage for their friends, but the bureaucracy was overwhelming. The farewells were filled with sorrow and a sense of unfinished business. The legacy of the Green Berets in Vietnam is complex and enduring. They proved that a small, highly trained force could have a strategic impact far beyond its numbers. Their work with the Civilian Irregular Defense Group demonstrated the value of cultural intelligence and partnership in counterinsurgency operations. The lessons learned in the jungles of Southeast Asia would shape the doctrine of the Special Forces for decades to come. They had fought in the shadows, often without recognition, carrying out some of the most dangerous missions of the war. The Green Beret motto, De Oppresso Liber, was more than just words to the men who wore the distinctive headgear. It represented a commitment to fighting for those who could not fight for themselves. In Vietnam, this meant standing beside the Montagnard villagers and facing down the aggression of the North. The bond forged in combat between the American advisors and their indigenous allies remains one of the most poignant aspects of the war. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and shared sacrifice. Today, the lineage of the modern Special Forces can be traced directly back to the A-teams of Vietnam. The emphasis on language skills, regional expertise, and unconventional warfare remains the core of the Green Beret identity. The tactics developed during the defense of camps like Nam Dong and the reconnaissance missions of the Studies and Observations Group are still studied at the Special Warfare Center. The spirits of those who fell in the Central Highlands serve as a constant reminder of the price of freedom. The story of the Green Berets in Vietnam is not just a history of battles and tactics. It is a human story of courage, endurance, and brotherhood in the face of adversity. It is the story of young men who traveled halfway around the world to live in remote villages and fight a war that was often misunderstood back home. They did their duty with honor and professionalism, embodying the highest standards of the American soldier. Their sacrifices ensured that the legend of the Green Berets would live on. Captain Roger Donlon, who survived the Battle of Nam Dong and received the Medal of Honor, became a symbol of the Special Forces spirit. His humility and dedication to his team reflected the values of the regiment. He often spoke of the bravery of the men who fought beside him, refusing to take credit for his actions alone. His story serves as a testament to the leadership and resilience required in the most extreme combat situations. It is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, individual acts of heroism can make a difference. The Green Berets also pioneered the use of psychological operations and civil affairs in Vietnam. They understood that military force alone could not win a counterinsurgency. They built schools, dug wells, and provided medical clinics, trying to improve the lives of the people they were there to protect. These efforts were designed to show the population that the government offered a better future than the communists. While the overall war may have been lost, these small victories in the villages left a lasting impression on the people they helped. The weapons and equipment used by the Green Berets were often non-standard, reflecting their unique mission. They favored the M16 rifle for its light weight and firepower in the jungle. They also used the Swedish K submachine gun and various suppressed pistols for stealth operations. The iconic tiger-striped camouflage uniform became associated with the elite units operating in Vietnam. Every piece of gear was chosen for its utility and reliability in the harsh tropical environment where rust and rot were constant enemies. The jungle itself was a formidable adversary. The heat was suffocating, often reaching over 100 degrees with high humidity. Leeches, snakes, and insects were a constant plague, and diseases like malaria and dysentery took a heavy toll on the troops. The terrain was rugged and unforgiving, with steep mountains and thick vegetation that limited visibility to a few feet. Navigating this landscape required immense physical fitness and mental toughness. The Green Berets had to be masters of survival as well as masters of war. Despite the difficult conditions, the morale of the Special Forces teams remained remarkably high. They were volunteers who took pride in their elite status and their ability to operate independently. The camaraderie within the 12-man team was intense, forged by the shared hardships and dangers of their mission. They trusted each other implicitly, knowing that their lives depended on the man next to them. This brotherhood was the glue that held them together through the long deployments and the violent battles. The Vietnam War was a defining moment for the United States Army Special Forces. It was the first major conflict where they were deployed in large numbers and given a central role in the strategy. The experience validated the concept of unconventional warfare and solidified the Green Berets' place in the American military structure. It proved that there was a need for soldiers who could think outside the box and operate effectively in the gray areas of conflict. The lessons of Vietnam are still relevant today, as special forces continue to operate in volatile regions around the world. As we look back on the history of the Green Berets in Vietnam, we must remember the individuals behind the legend. We remember the medics who saved lives under fire, the radio operators who called in airstrikes, and the weapons sergeants who trained the local fighters. We remember the officers who led from the front and the intelligence sergeants who gathered vital information. Each man played a critical part in the mission, contributing his unique skills to the team effort. Their collective service represents a chapter of American history that deserves to be honored. The Green Berets in Vietnam faced a complex and often frustrating war, but they met every challenge with determination and skill. They adapted to the enemy, the terrain, and the political landscape, always seeking a way to accomplish the mission. Their legacy is not defined by the final outcome of the war, but by the excellence and integrity with which they served. They set a standard for special operations that continues to inspire new generations of soldiers. They were and remain the quiet professionals. In the end, the story of the Green Berets in Vietnam is a testament to the human spirit. It is a story of men who pushed themselves to the limits of endurance for a cause they believed in. It is a story of loyalty to their comrades and compassion for the people they tried to help. As the jungle reclaims the old fire bases and the scars of war fade from the landscape, the memory of their sacrifice remains. The whisper of time carries their names, ensuring that the Green Berets of Vietnam will never be forgotten.